Good morning and happy Monday. Namaan here, joined by my co-host Jenny Ray. Welcome to another edition of Market Outsiders. It is Monday, June 2nd. Jenny Ray, how was your weekend?
Namaan, it was the most weekends of weekends. It was awesome. Last night there was some lake time. My kids are really getting wild on the tube. So we've made, I think, one of the greatest trades in all of history, which is that we let one of our friends park their boat at our house under our covered shed during the winter, and in exchange, we use their boat in the summer. And so I don't know if that makes me a deal maker, but I feel really great about it. So we went out on the boat last night. We have a tradition. It's KFC, which is literally the one time a year that we eat KFC and tubing on a Sunday night in the early summer, and it was just awesome. How about
Hey, that
you?
sounds like that sounds like a good deal to me. My weekend was great. I spent it in Chicago, went to a couple games at Wrigley Field, so crossed that off the bucket list, and yeah, had a great time. I'll tell you what though, it I expected Chicago at this time of year to be warm, and like I was sitting there at the ballpark and it was 61 degrees and windy. And for those of you who are regular listeners, you might know that I live in Austin, and like it doesn't even get to 61 degrees here at night. So I was very ill prepared for what the Chicago summer weather was like, at least this last weekend.
I don't know. That really kind of makes me delighted, if I'm honest about it. I hope that you were underprepared from a clothing perspective as well, because that really adds to the story. If so,
I mean, I had a hoodie, but for most people that would have been fine. Like I saw these Midwesterners walking around in shorts and t-shirts, and I was like, I can't do that anymore. My blood is too thin, you know? So,
yep. Austin's
but
made you soft, Naman.
hey, nothing beats going to a game at Wrigley, so that was awesome.
So, how did Wrigley compare to, like, give us another ballpark that's another one of your favorites and compare contrast? I mean, real fast, because we're talking about farming today, right, Naman?
Yeah, we were going to talk about farming, but I find actually more fascinating the business of ballparks. So we could pivot if we wanted to. But one of the things that I
Let's
appreciated
do
about
both.
Wrigley, okay, let's do both. Well, Wrigley's one of the only ballparks left that's in a neighborhood. So, it was, 1914 or 1916 when it opened, one of those 2 years. And, the neighborhood is called Wrigleyville. I was literally staying 2 blocks in a house, like from the ballpark. And so, like, there's like kind of an entertainment district, but it's just like down Clark Street and down Addison. Like, there's bars and there's restaurants, but it's not like an entertainment complex like you find with the new ballparks, where, there's like, multiple acres worth of just entertainment, gambling, food, ballpark, and it's removed from the life of the city. One of the things that I appreciated about Wrigley is that it's a part of the neighborhood. And so as I was walking around the ballpark, I was like, okay, like that puts the Cubs kind of at a disadvantage because there are like modern amenities that might not be there that other teams use to monetize the ballpark experience. But at the same time, the reason I'm here is because this is a historic place. Like if it was just another run-of-the-mill ballpark, I wouldn't have gone, right? I would have gone to
Have
see my
Have you been
team.
to Angel Stadium?
I have not been to Angel Stadium. I've been to Dodger Stadium. I've been up to AT&T or Oracle Park now in San Francisco. I've been to about half the ballparks in the league, and I think the only one that could compare to Wrigley is Fenway in Boston, right?
Or
And
the old
the,
Yankee Stadium, but I don't know if you got to
or
go
the
there
old Yankee
before.
Stadium. And one of my regrets is I didn't get to go there before they tore it down. And I was talking to a friend of mine about kind of the calculus that you would make if you were going to build a new Yankee Stadium. Is like, you're giving up the history, you're giving up some of the allure. What do you get in return? Well, you probably get more suites. You probably get more kind of like sponsorship slots. You get more concessions. And so then you have to be good enough as a team to like keep people coming if the allure of the history isn't there. And, I just think that the Cubs have done an incredible job of providing literally the friendliest ballpark I've ever been in. I was in like away team gear and like I only got cussed at once, which was way less than I was expecting. Like
Honestly, never would have
all
happened in Yankee Stadium if I'm honest.
well, all the ushers were like the nicest, most welcoming people. I ran into the head of security there, nicest guy, right? It was just like they call it the friendly confines, and I was like, oh, this is why they call it that. So, anyways, all around great experience. We can get into some of the levers that they would push and pull to like generate revenue if you want to. Um, but yeah, incredibly unique.
Honestly, I'd just love to really talk about two classes that I took in college that were comparably impressive. One was that I had an economics 201 professor, which is really like intro to macroeconomics, no, intro to microeconomics, at the University of Virginia. And it was this kind of sage professor who didn't just have the class, but he actually wrote a book, a murder mystery using economics. And I felt like it was a wild application of economics. It made it incredibly engaging for college students. The other, probably most oversubscribed class at the University of Virginia was a sports consulting class. And we actually did and to his credit, I actually remember some of the economics of sports consulting, not just the sports piece of it, which is, I think, why a lot of us were there. But he really talked about the kind of economic decision from an economic development standpoint, and a payoff standpoint. And he used like a lot of different economic principles to talk through the decision to build new stadiums in cities. And we actually did a very specific look at Baltimore, the ballpark in Baltimore, when we were doing it. And so we went through like a number of different case studies. It was basically like, should other cities not just allow, but foot the bill for some of these changes? And it was a really, really fascinating case study, that, of course, like any great college class, doesn't come to an explicit conclusion. But it was a really fascinating discussion about the merits and the economics of ballpark building. I know that's not what you were going to talk about, but I've seen this real dramatic increase in an interest in sports consulting. I found out that Deloitte has an entire sports consulting practice, that
Hmm.
Huron in their education practice has a sports consulting practice where they work with athletic departments. And so through the lens of consulting, we often see these trends that are kind of happening inside industry. And we've also seen commensurate with that an increase in industry hires from ex-consulting positions, right? Where you move into management decisions for teams. So if you've got insight on how ballparks operate and what the economics of ballparks are, I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, we should devote a whole episode to it. I'll say this. I've looked at some of the data around like the ROI from a taxpayer's perspective on like if building ballparks is ever worth it. And I've never come across data that says it is. So it generates a lot of economic impact, it generates a lot of economic activity, but never to the level of the subsidy that's given. Because these are now multi-billion dollar complexes, and a lot of the way that the kind of revenue sharing has been negotiated is that taxpayers foot a lot of the bill, but don't generate a lot of the return, right? That goes to the owners of the teams. And so right, whatever negotiating is happening there on behalf of the local government isn't always the best, at least from my outside vantage point. And so, like, my default when it comes to those kind of deals is always no. You've got to prove to me that the ROI is there. I think a lot of other people, when they hear, oh, multi-billion dollar investment in my city, their default is yes, and you have to talk them out of it. And I think the right position for, a local government to take is no. The answer is always no, unless you can prove the impact, and we can negotiate, a quote unquote fair deal. So I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule. I'm sure people have alternate perspectives, but from the numbers that I've seen, it's never worth that kind of public-private partnership, at least from the city's perspective.
Namaan, what you just described is a classic problem when jumping the shark between business and politics, which is that you hypothesize that decision making is rational, but you get a lot of headlines when you build a new ballpark, and you
100%.
also it's like nobody ever got fired for hiring McKinsey. Nobody ever got fired by bringing a new ballpark to the town. It's the people later who are paying off the bonds, who are trying to figure out how to foot the bill, who are increasing traffic in the region, that start to wonder whether it was worth it. But when the thing is getting built, nobody ever wonders that. That's the
Oh,
the challenge of political decisions.
100%, right? Like you have multiple timelines, you have diverse sets of stakeholders, and you have perverse incentives. And so, and we'll have to devote a whole episode to, political decision making, right? If we really want to unpack it. But you're absolutely right. You don't want to be known as the mayor or the city council that lost your city a potential or a particular team.
Well, if we can talk about unusual investments, I know that you've talked about making investments in, in kind of high net worth individuals, how owning ballparks isn't just not just ballparks, but teams, that owning kind of the entire team complex is kind of a crown in your investing cap. It's kind of the definition of a illiquid asset.
Yeah.
We've also talked just really briefly here about farming. I think I had a cow walk by the episode one morning in the window, and how we've seen an increase certainly recently in high net worth individuals buying farms for a myriad of reasons. One is that they are very there aren't more being created, there are only fewer, right? So they're kind of an increasingly constrained asset class. One big one in the United States is for tax write-offs. But you
Hmm.
saw an article this morning that you mentioned to me just as we were about to go live, and I'd love for you to kind of read it out, and maybe in my real life experience, I can verify or tear down some of the assumptions in the
Yeah,
article.
absolutely. So this article comes from the UK, comes from the BBC. You can see the headline there for yourself. We make more money from weddings now than farming. And this caught my attention because I feel like I've been hearing the same thing in the US, which is that farming is increasingly getting squeezed on the margin side, like incredibly hard work, incredibly long hours for not a lot of return. Is my outside perspective on what like most farming operations are like, unless you've been able to achieve massive scale. And so, as I was reading this, I was thinking about, a lot of kind of the local and regional farmers that you and I would have run into just, over the course of our lives and thinking about their businesses and their legacies, because a lot of these kind of farming operations are fifth, sixth, seventh generation operations. And it's sad to think that there might be a generation that's not able to keep it going. And so some of this data comes from the UK. You can see here in the third paragraph, three-quarters of farmers now rely on non-farming enterprises to supplement their food production. And some of these kind of diversification pathways I thought were really interesting. Falconry, helicopter rides, spas, solar farms, right? Like a lot of different ways to monetize the land and not even the land, but like monetize the vibe. I think that's a lot of what's happening right now. Is like, hey, it's idyllic, it's quiet, it's pollution free. Like, there's less and less spaces like that. And so, I think there's like an idealistic an opportunity for farmers to sell this like idealistic way of life. Come spend some time here because it's so unlike the rest of your world and the rest of your life, that some are taking advantage of. I thought this was really interesting, right? So this particular farmer, Mike Church's sixth generation farmer, makes 70% of his revenue now from non-farming activities. Later on in this article, you find that in the UK, over a quarter of farmers uh, actually generate negative revenue from farming activities. Put another day, they're losing money on food production. And so I don't know if you have anecdotal insight on this because you run a working farm, and if you've experienced the same thing, but this was a little bit concerning to me because, I think we want diversification in our food supply chain. And as I was reading this, I was thinking, oh, like if only the big guys are going to be able to stay in business. I don't know if that's necessarily what I would want personally.
I have so much tea to spill on this. I probably can't do it all in one episode. Not only do I own a farm, I've kind of, said for a couple of years on our Strategy Simplified podcast, my family and I live on a working farm. And that's really kind of has traditionally been a hobby farm. But in the last 2 years, I've mentioned that I don't buy individual stocks. And part of that is that I think that, I've also disclosed I've run for public office. I think that it's kind of, you mentioned perverse incentives. I think there's a perverse incentive for politicians to both run and speak about things that they have a specific vested interest in. Um, and so tying yourself to a stock that could lead to a meeting, that could lead to insider trading accusations, I just never thought that was worth it. So I've just said all of my public equities were going to be in indexes, and we're going to make that super simple. On the contrary side, actually on farming, I've really leaned in because I've wanted to understand this specific issue from the ground up. Because you often hear in the US, farming is impossible, farming is regulated, farming is X, Y, and Z. And so I in the last 3 years, I've bought a hay farm, I bought a wine farm, and I just bought a farm with a hydroelectric power plant on it with a group of investors. And I have a thesis around farms, not with experience of operating them, but also an investing thesis that I think is super interesting. And the thesis is this, that like every farm basically has three components. It has the kind of farming piece, right? The agriculture piece. It has and should have a business component, which can include farming, but shouldn't only include farming. And then it also should include residential real estate, because that portion of the offset, either having somebody in the property full time as we do on our hay farm, or having people in the property part-time as a part of the business, I think is a big opportunity for revenue generation. And I live in California where it's incredibly difficult to build. So we often will buy farms that already have structures on them that are rentable. And I'll just tell you a few quick anecdotes that absolutely support this. First of all, when we went to buy our first farm in 2015, I Googled how to make money on a farm because I was wondering, like, how are we going to make this happen? And I'd always told my husband, we should never go look at a farm because we don't want to buy something that we can't afford. And literally Namaan, the list was like 10 to 20 items long. And I don't remember exactly how many there were on there, but right at the bottom of the list was farming. It was weddings, it was day excursions, it was petting zoos, it was field trips, it was overnight stays, right? There were all kinds of other things that you could do. I do think there are some very interesting farming businesses or farming-based businesses that are worth exploring that I've encountered in my life. One was a guy that I met on a plane flying from Florida to Atlanta when I was working for Bain. He and his family had citrus groves in Florida, and they did gift boxes. Citrus gift boxes, right? Shipped citrus gift boxes. And I was reminded of the conversation I had with them 20 years ago, a week ago, because I received a gift box from Harry and David, which is based in Oregon. And I looked them up. They actually own and started on an original farm. I don't know if they do all of their farming now, but again, like a very interesting kind of internet-based business that is based in farming practices. But overall, those conversations that I've had absolutely verify this. The last thing that I'll just say is that when we were looking to buy our second farm, we met with a farmer in North Carolina because, we go on vacation in North Carolina to a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Obviously, what I'm doing is talking to people about business. And so my poor kids are with me hanging out at a farm stand. And I asked if we could do a farm tour. And the guy had never done a farm tour before, not once in his whole entire life. And during the farm tour, he was just explaining, hey, 40 years ago, he was about 6 years old. He said, when I got into farming 40 years ago, I could have shown you a regulatory handbook that was 5 pages long. He said, on the commodities market, I get the same price today for a zucchini or a pepper or a tomato that I did 40 years ago. But my regulatory booklet is now 28 pages long in each binder, and there are 7 binders. And he just said, like, there's nothing that's changed on the revenue side. We have major influxes from imports. We have big competition from large buyers like Walmart that are buying from us, so that's driven prices down. But also, like, the big issue for us is just cost. We can barely manage the costs. And so it's not just that they're not making money on farming, it's that the costs are so extravagant that they have to find other ways to diversify.
So, can I just ask you a question that you didn't prepare for, but I think it'd just be interesting to hear your off the
Sure.
cuff take. So, I hear you say, okay, like suppliers are, or excuse me, buyers are consolidating, right? So they have more purchasing power. There's increased competition from imports, but that the cost side of the equation is being squeezed because of like an expanding regulatory framework. So like in your view as a farmer, like if we were to go on a deregulation spree, like would that help save small and medium-sized family farms?
Massively. Massively, because we have like I'll give you an example in wine farming, right? Wine farming is very intense, and we have an old world wine farm in California. So we do everything by hand. We prune by hand, we pick by hand. Um, and largely we do that just with a very, very small internal staff. But there's one thing we can't do with internal staff, which is picking, right? We can't pick. And so we have to pick using like paid laborers, groups of laborers. And we happen to draw ours from our local community, but there are union laborers in California that have passed legislation that basically require every laborer, if you want to come out and pick, even for fun, for a day, to go through a pretty intense vetting process to be on payroll, for us to pay unemployment benefits for them. Like I can guarantee you that other places that are growing grapes don't have that same regulatory framework framework. We also we are regulated by 7 agencies. It's almost impossible to keep track of them. And we came across an absolutely insane one this year where we have to pay to become a farming agent in order to buy grapes from our neighbor, like our next door neighbor who grows grapes, who we've known for 40 years, and we won't buy his grapes if they're not good grapes. The government, 8 months after we bought the grapes, got involved and said, "Oh, P.S., were you a farming agent when you did that?" And so that expense, the time, the compliance of these kind of unnecessary burdens don't just make farms, difficult from a cost perspective. They make us uncompetitive on the world stage.
Hmm.
And when you reduce import costs and you don't reduce the regulatory framework, or even when you try to protect the US, like the current administration is doing through tariffs, but don't reduce the regulatory framework, it doesn't bring us back to profitability. So, deregulation in farming is one of the primary ways that you can do that. And I'm not anti all regulation. I do think that minimal amounts of regulation make sense, but I do think that there are a lot of self-serving bureaucrats who live in concrete villages who have never even been to a farm who are making these rules. Like if anybody who in the farming community knows having a registered agent in order to buy and sell produce from another farmer, insane. No one needs that. And so that was not an idea that came from a farmer. There should be nobody except for farmers making those rules. And so there are really, really burdensome regulations on farms that reduce in this. I'll just mention one more thing. It's also you should get kind of favored nation status, in my opinion, for some of the other regulations when it comes to farming. Like if we want to support farms, we should have expedited permitting processes to build glamping tents on farms, right? But you undergo the exact same permitting process as if you're trying to build a high rise in a downtown area, if you're trying to build a cottage on a farm. Of course, I'm speaking from California, which is like hyper regulated, but even in other places, like I think there should be absolutely expedited processes if we do care about farms and want to keep them in business. Because if farmers are trying to diversify to stay alive, it's that or develop the land. And I came from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where I've watched land, really, really valuable farmland that doesn't even need to be irrigated, just plowed under and developed because of that same calculus by developers. It's definitely worth considering, but I absolutely believe that deregulation is the answer for farms.
Mm. Last question for me, just because I'm fascinated. I know we're 20 minutes in here, and so I see here, right? Like Church has said that his return on investment from farming is about 2 to 3%. I don't know if he's actually talking about ROI here, or if the journalist here is conflating ROI with margins. Like I would think that that's like maybe margin more than
Seems
ROI.
like
But like,
it, probably,
does
yeah.
d does that track with your experience? Like, is that like specific to his context? I
ROI
know
is
this is
infinitesimal because
right.
every moment that you're farming, you're breaking a piece of equipment that you have to buy a new
Mhm.
one, and and margins are super tight. So I'd have to imagine that's margin. I really think that
Yeah.
your only goal is to stay alive for one more year in
Yeah.
the core farming business. And so, yeah, 20 to 30% on farming business. I think these are likely margin numbers. But absolutely, I mean, when I bought the wine farm, I said, like, we're not a farm, we're a hospitality business with a farming product. And like we cannot structure the way that we think about our marketing or anything that we do focused on the product only. Now, look, we make phenomenal wine. We need to have a great product. It's a feature of the business, but it's only a feature at this point. It's not a core operator. And if we literally just had what Midwestern wineries had, we were talking about the Midwest earlier, they have what are called show grapes, right? They plant grapes so that they can do weddings, and then they buy their wine in from us in California, from Washington, from Oregon. Like they buy the good stuff in, they label it, which you're allowed to do under their own labels, and then they take pictures in the grapes that are outside. Like that's basically what this guy is talking about. You create a farming experience for people, and then the money comes from the other, from the patios and the dinners and the weddings and everything else that you do.
The product's part of the flywheel, but it's not the core of the business.
It's not the core. Well, it can be for some people. That's the death
But
trap. It has to be services layered onto farming. And that was our thesis for every investment that we made, was that if you can add services to it, you'll actually make money.
That's where the margin is. Well, Jenny Ray, thanks for unpacking for us just a little bit of the farming business. Thanks everyone for listening today to Market Outsiders. If you have experience with the business of ballparks or sports, let us know what you've learned. Point us to some research that you've seen around the economics of ballparks, around the return on investment that communities see when they partner with private entities on building ballparks or stadiums. We'd love to unpack that for you on a future episode. Send us your comments and your thoughts on farming and the value proposition of farming and the business of farming. We'd love to hear your perspective. We'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, to unpack a couple of additional stories that are in the news that maybe the mainstream media isn't paying as much attention to as we think they should be. We will see you same time, same place tomorrow. Thanks so much.